On this episode of the Camp Owners Podcast, Howie and I sit down with Michael Waxman, or Wax, social worker and former staff member of Camp Robin Hood. We had a great conversation about gender and summer camp. I personally had a lot of great takeaways from this episode, from simple changes that I can make as an ally for the LGBTQ plus community, as well as reflections on short and long-term goals and changes that I want to make to support our campers, staff, and the LGBTQ plus community at large. We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did and have many great reflections and takeaways that you can start to apply for next summer.
Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast, a space for camp owners to talk about the unique aspects of camp ownership and get inspired by each other. We're going to sit down with camp industry experts, leaders, and fellow camp owners to hear how the camp dream transpired for them, learn from each other, and discuss some of the biggest issues in the private camp industry. My name is Howie Grossinger. Welcome back, everybody. I am the owner of Camp Robin Hood in Toronto.
And I am Kelly Shuna, owner and director of Hidden Pines Ranch Day Camp in Stillwater, Minnesota. If you're looking to find and subscribe to the Camp Owners Podcast and become one of our biggest fans, you can either find us online at gocamp.pro/COP or by searching for us in your favorite podcast app. Finally, if you're listening to this and think it would be useful for other camp owners or aspiring camp owners in your circle, please feel free to send them a note to listen.
Hi, Kelly. Nice to be together again. I think it's that time where we have to give a huge shout out to our sponsor. We are so thrilled that Camp Brain continues to be our amazing sponsor of the Camp Owners Podcast. Camp Brain is camp management software that serves over 1,300 camps. They have been doing it since 1994, and with 45 plus dedicated staff to meet every need you have, they are ready to help. In fact, Camp Brain supports their clients with an unmatched desire to delight them, with a passionate, friendly voice just a phone call away. You know, Kelly, as I've said before on the show, I've been a proud Camp Brain client for many, many years. In fact, since 1994. And I can tell you, no matter how frazzled I get or any of my staff, when we pick up the call for some technical support, you can always count on a Camp Brain staff member to put you at ease, tell you that they've got it, and to help you with whatever your challenge is in that moment. They're amazing. And I encourage everyone to check out Camp Brain if you're considering camp management software, making a change, etc. You can check them out at campbrain.com or call 866-485-8885.
All right. Howie, do you get like a special platinum member pin from Camp Brain for all those years of service?
Well, you know, I'm not going to lie to you. I sort of, after the show's air, I just let, Rob and Shane at Camp Brain know that I gave them another shout out. So what that translates into, I'm still waiting for, but they're good people. They won't forget me.
A little bat line. It's Howie. Pick up right away. All right. Well, today we are discussing what Howie and I think is a really important topic we've had on our list of things to tackle, and season 2 felt like the perfect time. And just in reflection of what's happening today in our world, society, and with our youth, and really talking about it in the camp industry, and that's gender. I was researching a little bit for this show, and I found a 2019 Pew Research study, which I don't think there's much in 2020 because research is a little paused. But it found that 35% of Gen Z say they personally know someone who uses gender neutral pronouns, like they and them, compared to a quarter of millennials who say the same. So there's a number of progressive camps in our industry that serve LGBTQ plus youth, as well as camps leading the way with all gender cabins, which we're very proud of. But, we're really wanting to talk today and looking forward to a discussion about how camps can be progressive and proactive versus reactive in serving both campers and staff who identify as gender neutral, transgender, cisgender, or a member of the LGBTQ plus community.
Yes, exactly, Kelly. And when we started, contemplating this show, the first person that came to mind is our guest. I'm really happy to introduce our audience to Michael Waxman. We call him Wax, so it's going to be Wax on the call and on the show today. But Wax is a social worker and a very experienced camp leader. He's someone that I've known for almost 20 years, and I think will be an incredible resource and provide some amazing insight into today's topic. Wax, it's our pleasure to welcome you to the Camp Owners Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Howie and Kelly.
Really nice to have you. You know, one of the things that we do at the beginning of each podcast is, typically each one of our guests has a connection to camp. And while I could probably go off and tell people about what I know of your history at camp because of our connection, but I thought maybe if you could take a couple minutes to tell a little people about your journey in camp and how it's led to perhaps the things you're doing professionally today.
Great, thank you. So I started my camp career at Camp Walden as a camper when I was 12 years old, and I followed the program up through as a camper into CITs, and then I became a counselor at camp, a unit head, SIC coordinator, and then worked my way onto the leadership team at Camp Walden, and I was there for a number of years, working both in the summer and part-time in the office during the off season. I left camp in 2015 to pursue some other goals as a social worker and pursue a private practice where I have that now, and I've been doing counseling there mostly with young people, kids, teens, young adults, a lot of whom identify on the LGBTQ spectrum. I've been doing consulting with camps as well. So I'm doing some presentations regarding mental health in teens or in staff, and supporting camps when they're working with LGBTQ campers or staff or families.
Amazing. So while Wax is referring to the very famous name of Camp Walden, he is referring to Camp Walden Canada for all you wonderful Camp Walden people out there. And there are many of us, but a proud alumni of Camp Walden Canada for sure. As we start our discussion today, Wax, I think for Kelly and I as a starting point, we sort of want to get your thoughts on why do you think it's important for camp owners to be talking about gender as it relates to campers and staff? Over the years of your practice, your experience at camp, I thought maybe that would be a good starting point in our discussion today.
Sure. I think that camp is one of those places where so many things get separated or divided by gender. There are places where there's certainly boys' cabins and girls' cabins, but in some places camps are separated by gender that way. There's boys' camp and girls' camp, and in a lot of places there's those two, and you can't mix. Boys' wash houses and girls' wash houses or shower houses, and I think that camp is a place where a lot of things get separated that way by gender. So it's a good topic in terms of what's happening at camp.
I think that for us as camp professional and camp owners, this topic for us has become more relevant and prevalent as we sort of navigate registration and what's happening in society. And there's no doubt that as things happen in our larger community, they make their way into our camps. And I think that for Kelly and I, as we are, predominantly day camp operators, I think we both have, engaged families. And I know I've engaged also staff who this topic of gender and identity have become, almost annual discussions, which we've embraced and learned lots about. But when you think about, this topic about, day and overnight camp, gender identity and all these things, what are some things that you're finding have been some of the most, the biggest questions or topics related to gender that you've sort of been supporting camp owners and directors on? What are your thoughts on all of that?
There's always a lot of talk about registration forms. That's usually one of the first 5 questions that gets asked on a registration form is either sex or gender, and whether or not it should be a drop down or an empty space. So registration forms is a really big one. And then washrooms is another really big thing that comes up often.
What would be your advice to camps wondering about that because for our camp, I don't feel like we're progressive in that way. It's something that's on my mind for registration 2021 because we haven't opened yet. But regarding, do you have a drop down and it's gender? That do you ask pronouns? You do both. I asked my camp software. I'm like, can I put anything in there that I want? And you can. So tell me what, I was just listening to a webinar yesterday and it was like good, better, best. So like what's best in that regard, would you say?
Well, I think it's first to think about what is the question and why you're asking. So for people who don't know, it's described like this. Most simply, sex takes place in the bathing suit area, and that's how we define sex. Whether somebody is born or what sex organs or reproductive organs they're born with. Gender occurs throughout the rest of the person, in their heart, in their mind, how they express themselves. That's gender. So when it comes to registration forms, the first part is to think about why are you asking? Are you asking because you need to know what body parts they have for health reasons? Or are you asking about gender because you're separating people into cabins or into groups and you're separating people by gender? So to answer best, I would say, I think in a camp setting, best is to ask for both and to leave it as open, not give options.
Okay. We group campers by sex. There you go. I'm going to use the best terminology that I can. And something that I thought a lot about is getting away from that now and starting to progress. So at least in our second to sixth grade group, it's by sex, gender. But I thought really about, we need to get away from that now before we have a camper who's open with us about their gender and not feeling it, they feel and fit into a boy or girl group. Because I don't want to be caught in a situation where we have a camper identify in that way. And then I'm trying to figure out, where do I put them? What's best? Like being reactive and not knowing to tell parents. So I've thought a lot about that for our camp for 2021. And again, we haven't had campers identify that way, but I've had a middle school camper ask their counselor, why is it just only girls in our group? And I'm glad they asked, because I think it pushes us to be proactive in those and progressive in those changes. But it's a big change. It's going to be a drastic change, but I think that it's a necessary and it's the right change for our kids.
Yeah, and I think that, just like all of the topics that we're tackling today in the camping world as it relates to inclusion and diversity and better understanding and Wax, we've engaged some really great people around, the issue of, people of color, particularly in the camping industry, and how we can make our camps more inclusive so people of multi-racial backgrounds and people of diverse backgrounds can be comfortable in our settings. I think it's a good starting point to talk with registration, because that ends up being where we are, right at the beginning as a parent looks at, completing those forms. And I'd like to also, I would assume that when we talk about registration, am I correct in understanding that you would apply that same approach to a staff application?
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you like to expand on anything related to the topic of registration forms as it relates to maybe staff differences? And obviously a parent completes a camper registration, but it's the staff member who's, hopefully a staff member is doing it on their own these days.
Right. Also, I think it's important to ask about pronouns on a staff member application. And either in a day camp setting or an overnight camp setting, if you do have all gender spaces or all gender cabins, to ask where they would prefer to live or be grouped with, and who they would prefer to work with. And also I would leave that blank and see if there's preferences there as well. When you're thinking again about about these, if there's a health form, sex would most likely be put onto a health form if that's separate, whereas gender would be put onto a registration form if it's in terms of grouping.
Mhm.
That's a really good point about the health form. I didn't think I was thinking about in the application, but the health form, that's a super, really good like audit of all your stuff, right? Like auditing all of your forms. Last summer, I had a situation where we typically have all of our boy groups from third grade or fourth grade on there with male counselors. And then we have female counselors with our younger boys on up. And I had a situation where I was done hiring pretty much. I had one in my mind spot for a male counselor, and I had this phenomenal female counselor. And I was like, oh, I'm done hiring for all my female staff. And then I thought about it, I have these three in my mind, just okay male counselors, but they fit that bill. And then I had this amazing female counselor. So what am I doing? Why does it have to be that way? And it was interesting. I asked my kids, because my kids are campers, and it was in my son's age group. And I was like, Isaac, what do you think? What do you think about having a male counselor or a female counselor? And he was like, I don't care. I was like, there we go. There you go, Kelly. So that to me was an eye-opening of, it doesn't have to be black and white. It doesn't have to be how it's always been. It can be different. So that to me was a moment last summer in hiring with staff for sure.
And I've had that same experience. I'm sorry, Wax. I had a similar experience as well related to our youngest campers, and again, this is a good day camp example because, we've traditionally put female staff with our pre-kindergarten age kids. And just recently we've gone to a trend of, had some very interested male staff who want to work, with the youngest kids in camp. And as a camp operator, I'm like, if I can get more male role models and whatever that means today, I use that as sort of just this general, almost old school reference. But, when I think about the makeup of elementary school teachers and the types of, audience that young kids get in terms of leadership and stuff like that, we've started to put more females with our senior kindergarten and grade 1 kids. And now we've got this wonderful group of, young people who've graduated our CIT program, and they come in an interview and say, I want to work with the youngest kids. And actually what I noticed, and Kelly, I don't know if this is your experience, and even Wax, your thoughts on this being a camp person is, at first parents were a little surprised that we had a male staff. It's interesting on how the parents react, because you're right, the kids' reaction is like, make no difference to me. But sometimes, and we've gradually seen over the last few years that it's just become just an obvious thing for us to just be very diverse in the placement of staff and with various age groups. And overnight camp for sure can be, much more challenging than a day camp when it comes to some of the nuances of communal living and stuff like that, which we can maybe tackle at some point. But I just wanted to add that. Wax, what are your thoughts on this latest chat?
Well, I think what you're bringing up is something so interesting is the idea of gender stereotypes, that women or girls are better with the younger kids and boys are better with the older kids. And that can go even further, that girls should be working on theater staff or arts and crafts, and boys that all get put on sports. And that's simply not the case. And camp is such a great place to break down those gender stereotypes and let people really work towards their skills and their abilities. As a camper, when I wasn't I didn't love sports. That wasn't my favorite activity to go to. And it always felt good when there was a guy on arts and crafts or a guy on theater who could validate the things that I like to do as a male. So I think that it's such a great example for the campers as well, allowing them to see themselves in these other staff when it comes to interests and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And I find it's that year of change that you might get those comments. And then the next year, it's like, well, that's probably always the way it's been. Or for new families, that it's like, there just has to be that year of transition to be able to say, we're going to change this and here's why. And then the next year, it's the norm. So it seems like it's pretty easily or your environment in camp is pretty adaptable, I think. And I've noticed I've had campers that have come back as counselors who our previous mission at our camp, they didn't feel a part of that. And when we changed our mission, they came back. And that was so interesting to me that even if you don't think people are listening and watching to some of those changes you make, they are. And I think they speak volumes about your camp and where you're going and where you want to go. So I think that's good stuff to think about. I saw, I don't know what it was, a meme or something on social media, but in regards to your restroom comment and how, I don't know what you do for restrooms. We do porta pots. So, everybody's welcome in a porta pot. But they had a sign on their washroom, and it says, it doesn't matter like how you identify or who you are, just wash your hands, and something else. It was like, clean up after yourself and wash your hands. And I like that. Like,
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who you are, but just clean up after yourself and wash your hands.
Right. Yeah. At some camps, washrooms are big and communal spaces, or showers are big and communal spaces. And in other places, there's individual single washrooms with a toilet and a sink, or maybe just a toilet and the sinks are communal. I think that if possible, that's the way to go as much as possible. I have these conversations with camps all the time, because some of them are built on spaces that are hundreds of years old, and they've had their buildings that are very old. And in order to change things, they have to change plumbing, and they have to change maps and the way that everything else is set out, and that can be very difficult. And so what are simple, easy solutions? Having an all gender space, or a more private space, if you're able to create that for camps, I think makes it easier. And it's also helping out some of the kids who might be feeling, or staff who might be feeling anxious about going to the washroom in front of anybody, regardless of their gender. If somebody has a stomach issue and they don't want to be, going to the washroom in front of everybody else, they might feel safer in a more private space. Or if somebody is feeling self-conscious about their body, to be able to shower in a more private space and have that available to them makes so many more people feel comfortable, not just the kids or staff who are, their gender identity might be different, who might be struggling with their gender identity.
Yeah, we're finding that as well. And we're finding as well, and maybe listeners are identifying with this, is that these issues, I will call them, of privacy or wanting to be more private, is occurring at younger and younger ages than we've, I during my own camp experience, the 4 and 5-year-olds who, wouldn't really have a care in the world if they were in a small change room all together doing it. But we're starting to see, and upbringing, faith, background, whatever the influences for that behavior, we're finding that we're reevaluating the spaces we're providing for these things to make it as generic as possible, so that regardless of what the camper or the staff members facing, they can be comfortable regardless, and there won't be any questioning of, it's just natural, we're all doing this in private. So we're starting to navigate this. But I think for many of us who have facilities that are well established, we sometimes, think that it takes a drastic change to create that space. And sometimes they're just small solutions that get people much more comfortable. And I think, if anything, we as camp operators have to make a more conscious effort to, just as we look at programs and how we want to change them for inclusion, we have to look at our physical space too, and how are we promoting that just by giving space in the most, respectful way. Any other thoughts to that, Wax?
Well, you brought up the idea of communal living before, and how that can be a challenge. I have the same answer. When it comes down to communal living and privacy or changing, we need to be able to provide these private spaces for everybody. Again, not only just because of their gender identity or their sexual orientation. We're teaching kids more and more about about your body and respecting your body and privacy. And we need to think about those in communal spaces as well, like cabins or change rooms or washrooms.
So I have to imagine that as a resident camp, there are a lot more significant things to think about that you bring up of showers, cabins, washrooms. And you talk about small steps or small changes, doesn't have to be drastic. Do you have recommendations about how to do that? I mean, I was Googling again before this, and I hope I say the name right. It's Camp Tawanga, I believe, in California. And how they started was by having an all gender cabin. And it was something that campers could opt into. And so, for resident camps, does it have to be all your cabins are all gender? Is it you start with one cabin and see how that goes? I mean, do you have any suggestions on what can be those initial steps without drastically changing everything?
I think the idea of having one cabin as all gender is a wonderful idea. And if camps can offer that, and it's something that people would opt into, that way they know, families know that you are open and accepting and willing to make changes. There are people who will feel more comfortable in cabins of their gender, and that's okay too. We need to help everybody feel safe and comfortable. So I think that would be one good small change, or I would consider that a big change, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Small changes that people other small changes that can be made. I would suggest thinking about how you address the entire group. So oftentimes, an address is ladies and gentlemen or boys and girls, and that excludes people. Those people who identify as non-binary or not identifying with any particular gender, they might feel excluded. So what are some other things that you can say to include everybody? An example might be campers and staff, listen up. Or, if it's just one cabin, addressing that one cabin of everybody by the cabin name rather than by calling it, hey boys, listen up, listen to me. So I think those are some smaller changes that can be made. When doing introductions, asking people to introduce their pronouns as well. So someone goes around the room, hi, I'm Wax, my pronouns are he, him, and then it goes to the next person to introduce themselves that way, and having that as a part of the way that introductions are being done, another small change that can be open and welcoming to many people.
I think about, the cultural changes that camps may have to go through. Camps are, really steeped in tradition. And we talk about, and we have talked about in previous episodes, how we provide a more inclusive environment. We've had the discussion, Kelly and I, about re-examining, the term color wars and the connotations for that, particularly if you have campers and staff who come from, grew up in environments that were threatening and actually experienced war, perhaps, and things of that kind. And I guess the next, and I think camps are doing a great job examining all of those things. And I think it's at a level that it's never been at in terms of examining those things. Having said that, when it comes to the topic of, when we talk about LGBTQ plus, the topic of, gender identity and sexual orientation, culturally, Michael Wax, what do you want, camp owners to think about when they do perhaps an examination? They want to be more progressive. What's the starting point for looking at how they can, sort of send a healthy message that, this is the culture that we have here. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's big messages and little messages. So in my email signature, my pronouns are listed there. And so anyone who talks to me will know that I identify as male. But anybody else who sees that will also know that I'm an ally and that I'm ready and open and able to listen. So that's sort of a little signal. Again, going back to registration forms, putting things like parent 1 and parent 2, or not even parent 2, but just giving an option to list parents is a way of saying we are open and we are inclusive, because there's a lot of forms out there, not just camps, but lots of places that still say mother and father. And so asking about those kinds of things in that way is one of those sort of little signals of showing the people who are able to read the signals that, this is a safe and inclusive space. Doing training with staff about language or the way that certain things are done. So when I was doing training at camps, I would talk about, if it's letter writing day, you don't say write a letter home to mom and dad, because not everybody has a mom and dad at home. And some people might have two moms or two dads or only one parent, or they might live with grandparents, or all kinds of different permutations. Asking a boy which girl they want to take to the dance is another conversation that's just assuming that a boy is heterosexual and wants to be with a girl. And then other programming things that are done, like when you do things like the dating game at a camp, or having a Sadie Hawkins dance. Different programs like that are giving messages that we are a heteronormative place. It's boys and girls, and boys like girls and girls like boys, and nothing else in between. But when you have programs that are different, or you don't have those kinds of programs, or you help people with conversations, who do you want to take to the social? Who are you interested in? Rather than which boy or which girl are you interested in, is a completely different conversation and leaves it open for people.
I love that. We play Know Your Boo. So your boo can be anybody. So there you go. That's an easy little change. Sorry, Howie, I interrupted you, but I was just thinking, I'm sure it exists out there, but how amazing would it be if there was a LGBTQ plus audit for camps, like an audit for camp owners, and you go down and like audit these things in your registration forms for campers, and audit these things in your staff, like just these little things to look at. Look through your staff training. Do you talk about this? Like, what are the verbiage you use in there? How can you train on language? How do we address staff? I think we do a lot of these things, but I don't know that we also give our staff the why. We automatically are like, hello, campers. But I think in training, like, here's why we say campers. But I think an audit would be incredible, because it would allow us to really dig into those things and check ourselves about where we can grow and get even better at what we're already doing for these youth.
Mm-hmm. I think that would be a great idea, but also to include progressive steps, maybe that's taken year by year. With everything that is going on, the anti-Black racism, the anti-Black racism movement, and having these conversations about all of these changes that need to be made so that we can have more diverse and inclusive spaces. We're asking everybody to commit to a lot, all really, really great things that need to be done. But I think that it's going to take time to make these changes in the right way. And I've had this conversation, like I said before, with camps that are, the physical space is steeped in years and years of how it's been and difficulty to change, but also the traditions that camp has, that it takes time to make change, and to make change in the proper way. So I think an audit would be good, but also some kind of progressive steps that camps can adopt that, Kelly, like you said, includes training about why we're doing these things, why we're changing these things. And that's also going to help build the trust of the families of the campers that you're sending as well, I think, to have that and explain why things are being done that way.
And I think that, for some of us, in this trio here, are a little older, and like myself, I have found that navigating all of these topics about increased, enhanced inclusion and just greater awareness of these topics, I have found I don't have to look much further than the young leaders that I have within my organization to just ask open questions, call it a Camp Robin Hood summit on topic A, and just leaning in on people who've been with my organization and saying, what is your experience, in this world, this topic, this reality, and how can we make camp, work towards, a better place related to, anti-Black racism, let's say, it's gender issues, I found myself, several years ago, not knowing, but coming on a hiring situation where I hired a trans staff member. And, I was, new to this. I was very hard on myself about whether I was using the right language and, approaching the topics of discussion when, it was ultimately shared with me that this is this person's life and what they're facing and what they're, working towards, and could camp be a good place for them. And, I think you just need to lean on people as you navigate this to give you some insight. And I know personally, I have Wax on this call because he was one of those people who helped me, actually reaffirm that, I did okay in my first sort of discussions with this person, and they came to camp for a few years and it was great. And just the feeling of that your place doesn't have to be the same as it always is. There's lots of room to be progressive in this way. And your camp is still going to be the same spirited place, and you're going to have really happy campers and staff and parents. And it just, sometimes it's intentional because you really want to do it. And sometimes it just happens to come your way and you navigate it in the time and you're saying to yourself, we can do this. This is not as difficult or as challenging as people, make it out to be. I hope I portrayed that properly, Wax, like in just terms of just the way this stuff comes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so. And I just love the idea of asking questions and consulting and turning to young leaders and to the individual that you're trying to support. What do you need from me? How do you want me to share this with campers or other staff, or not share it at all? What do you need in order to feel safe in this space?
I think you're so right, Howie. Like, that is hitting the nail on the head, that we have these unbelievable youth that I think just naturally who they are, their character, they're drawn to work at camp. And then when we say to them, we need your help, they say Gen Z, they want to be part of more than just a job. They want a mission, they want passion. So I think this is the perfect way to get them, involved. And we will be always fortunate in this industry of never worrying about our staff is getting too old, right? Like, they will always be young. And so they're the perfect people because they're already invested. Even if they're new to you, they're the ones that I think can help bring us along in this, and we can follow in their footsteps or right alongside them to do these things and be progressive right alongside their generation.
And it's very like the responses of young people, this group of older campers in overnight camp, let's say, or young staff at all of our camps, like these are not sort of outside issues. Like it's very matter of fact. It's the way it is. It's casual. And, as you mentioned in your research about Gen Z versus millennials reaction, I think we're at a really great moment in time where, they're looking for us to embrace everything, and they're along with it because it's just part of their daily life. They've grown up with this. It's the way they see other people is very different and normative kind of thing, and just everyone's everybody. And I just find I'm relieved at the fact that they can say, like, no big deal, let's move on, let's talk about this, and let's make it work for everybody, which is my experience on this topic. And there's still lots of work to do, and we re-examine things, but I think we can be a little more intentional about asking ourselves the questions, as I think what you're saying, Wax, is that it is not big overhauls to what we do, but things that can express sort of a commitment that this is totally something that is on our radar, and we want to be as positive as we can about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like what you said, Wax, about inviting that person to the table to help you problem solve. And I think that can be hard for us sometimes as camp owners. I'm making a generalization here, but our camps are so personal and business. And I think we feel like they reflect us as people. Mm-hmm. And that can sometimes cause defensiveness for things that we need to change. Or like you said, Howie, about you were so hard on yourself about language. And this makes me think about this summer with our work crew. It was 4th of July. And the day before 4th of July, we were like, even though there's no campers here, we're going to dress up and we're going to be patriotic. And, you know, someone else in the leadership team was like, yeah, and if you don't have costumes, we have them. And I'm like, yes, everybody has to dress up, like caught up in the moment, like everyone needs to dress up. This is so great. And I had a leadership team member reach out to me that night about one of my staff members that said, you know what, he doesn't feel patriotic right now with everything that's going on and doesn't want to dress up. And my initial reaction was, oh my gosh, I've offended him. Okay, no one's dressing up. Like I just went atomic, right? And I do this. I went nuclear. I was like, okay, in the group me, no one has to dress up. I didn't say in those words, but you know what? It's okay. No one has to dress up. You know, it's whatever. And I thought about it and obviously was super emotional about it because I felt so bad. And couple days later, I sat down with the staff and I said, you know, here's what I wish I would have done. I wish that I, instead of gone nuclear and like, no one has to dress up, I wish I would have called that person and said, help me to figure this out to make it comfortable for everybody. And I wish I would, then I feel like we could have figured out like dress up for whatever feels right to you tomorrow or whatever you want our country to look like, right? Like not what 4th of July has looked like, but what do you want to see our country look like? So that for me was a big lesson. I talked to the staff about it really vulnerably to say, here's what I wish I would have done. I wish I would have invited them to the table versus just like karate chop the table. Like we're just not going to do it. But that I think relates to this too of come help me figure this out. And I think it would speak volumes too to that staff member about how much you value who they are and how they can impact your camp.
Wax, I know that you touched a little bit on staff training, and I know Kelly and I talk a lot about staff training in whatever topic we're discussing in these episodes. And, you know, you mentioned a little bit about, you know, approaches to staff training. You know, what are some advice you want to give camp owners as they think of, you know, formulating a staff training, you know, protocol or including some of this topic into their training? Any immediate thoughts of some best practices that you'd recommend?
Well, I think that having a staff training on gender and gender orientation and sexual orientation would be really great, helping people understand everything about it and how to address it with campers, the same way that you would have staff trainings on any other topic. Helping people have these kinds of difficult conversations or what kinds of questions to answer if campers are asking them, I think would be really good. And looking at some programs that are run at camp, like a dating game or a Sadie Hawkins dance, or separating the sports by boys and girls and asking the questions, why are we doing it this way? And what can we do to make it more inclusive?
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Kelly, any other thoughts on this topic? I think we've really captured a lot of good insight, of course, from Wax. And I think that whatever, and I would just suggest to, you know, our listeners, you know, wherever you are geographically, there are so many amazing resources locally. I know that in the organization that you work in, Wax, I mean, you know, social services organizations in various, you know, cities and counties, et cetera, you know, provide, you know, this kind of resourcing. Do you have any advice to camp operators how to seek out sort of outside their camp organization people they can access to get some good support?
Around any big city, there's going to be an LGBTQ organization that can be supportive to them. But I would also suggest going to your camp associations. A lot of the work that I have done has been through the Ontario Camping Association, and a lot of the connections I have made have been through that. So if you have a provincial or a state or you know, your country camp organization, camp association is a great place to get that information as well, and find other people who are either able to train on it or answer questions or connect with other camps that are looking to do the same kind of work.
This feels to me like a good opportunity to get your leadership and your young staff members involved in your training to help you reimagine it and boost it up. I feel like we have race, diversity and inclusion, equity training to boost up this year, Howie. And I feel like our gender training, it's that kind of year. Don't you feel like that? Like, oh yeah, I got some good work to do on training, but I have a lot of work to do. So I think that this will be a leaning into them, like you say, Howie, of maybe a little task force on training of how you can boost some of these things and get them together on Zoom. Wax, any final advice to camp owners? Anything you want them to walk away from this podcast with, or things to really ponder? Just any wisdom for everybody?
Just that this work is important, and it can really help people feel safe and comfortable and welcome in your space, in your camp environment. So it's important to do this work on gender and sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite takeaways that I'm going to take away from this is adding my pronouns to my signature.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one, it's like right today. That's exciting to me. The one, because what you said about they will know automatically and I'm an ally is just, that gives me goosebumps. That's really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. So thank you for sharing that today.
Great.
Awesome. Well, Howie, it's time to talk about what's inspiring us right now. That just inspired me. So, but I'm not going to take the easy way out and use that one. But at the end of every show, we end with something that's inspiring us. So this can be a book, article, podcast, documentary, leadership quote, or anything else to help us be better camp professionals. I'll be a good role model, and I will start with what mine's going to be. And it's exciting to me because I think it applies to our topic. And I'm a big book reader, but my next book I just ordered is Wolfpack by Abby Wambach. She was on the national soccer team, and I heard her on the Brene Brown podcast. And one of my favorite things she talked about was when she got an SB retirement award. And she was up there with, I think, late Kobe Bryant, and another player. And it struck her as she was walking off the stage that these men were thinking, what am I going to do with all my money? How am I going to invest it? And she was thinking, how am I going to pay my mortgage? And so it's a lot about old leadership rules spin to new leadership roles and gender. And so I'm really excited to read it. And I'm hoping that it will give me some good staff training tools. Howie, do you want to go next?
For sure. I've been inspired by our discussions about anti-Black racism, and now the topic that we dealt with today, and working towards a more inclusive environment at our camps. And it made me think about an activity that I know my wife Sari does consistently at camp with our leadership team, our staff, our CITs, and it's called Barnga. And I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's an amazing camp. It's basically an intercultural simulation game. And in the show notes, I will put a YouTube link to how it's played and where you can get the resources. But the outcome, the goal of the activity is to help people get a healthy appreciation of our commonalities, how we're better when we're together and working together. And it's a really eye-opening activity. It's one we've used in staff training, and I encourage people to check it out. And it's an inexpensive but valuable tool as we, work towards inclusion and having everyone feel comfortable in our setting. So I encourage everyone to check it out. And Michael, Wax, what do you have?
So, well, on the theme of young people as leaders and turning to young people, I saw a documentary a couple of weeks ago called Us Kids, and it follows the students from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, and the changes that they made in terms of gun laws and how they were able to get an entire movement going. And it followed them from the changes in gun laws movement to registering young voters, and talked about how important that was, but also really focused on some of the mental health and some of the trauma and PTSD that some of the students were going through afterwards. And it was just something that was just very interesting to see for me as a mental health professional. But just I was inspired by how open these young people were talking about their own mental health struggles and what they were dealing with.
Amazing. I have to check that out for sure. Wow, some good things to take in after the episode for sure. Wax, I want to thank you on behalf of Kelly once again for joining us. Some wonderful insight and some really great suggestions that I think that our audience, the camp owners out there, can really take back to their organizations and their camps. If anyone wants to get a hold of you, Wax, if people want to get more wisdom from you after the show, how do people get a hold of you?
Email is best. It's M like Michael, B like Bob, Waxman@gmail.com.
Amazing. Kelly, how do people get a hold of you?
They can get a hold of me at Kelly with a Y at hiddenpinesranch.com.
Wonderful. And if you want to get a hold of me or touch base throughout the year, you can reach me at howie@camprobinhood.ca. Please don't forget that you can find all of our show notes at gocamp.pro/COP. You can find the resources that we mentioned in this episode and lots of good stuff there from our show and all the other amazing Go Camp Pro podcasts out there. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. We want to thank you for listening. Wax, thank you once again. Kelly, it's always a pleasure, and we look forward to having everyone join us on the next episode of the Camp Owners Podcast. Take care, everybody.